My name is Mace Vaughan. I'm the Pollinator and Agricultural Biodiversity Program Director at a group called the Xerces Society. And my job is to help farmers and ranchers and gardeners to create habitat for pollinators and beneficial insects, to manage habitat, to work on pesticide risk reduction so we can try to protect these important insects.
Can you explain why pollinators matter? Like, why do they play an important role in agriculture and farming in particular?
More than 80% of all flowering plants in the world need a pollinator. If we go to agriculture, like the majority of our crop species, the different crops that we grow, need a pollinator in order to set fruit or to set seed. And so, this is everything from tomatoes to apples to blueberries to watermelon and squash and cucumbers, canola and sunflower seeds for oil. This is alfalfa seed that we grow to then plant for hay that we feed to cattle and other livestock. Pollinators just play this critical role within all of these different crops that we grow. And everything from oils to drinks to coffee. Can't have coffee without pollinators.
Wow. You just listed a couple of foods I definitely had not considered pollinators behind. Are there any others that maybe would be surprising for someone to hear?
Chocolate is a really good one. It's pollinated by a tiny little fly. And I think too, people think a lot about the fruits that we eat, but there are a lot of vegetables, like think about lettuce, for example, or carrots. Like, if you know how a carrot grows, you don't need a pollinator to actually produce the carrot itself. But if you want to have carrot seed or onion seed or lettuce seed, you got to have pollinators in order to produce all those seeds that then we plant to get all this food, and frankly, all these pollinator dependent foods, that's where we get the bulk of our vitamins and minerals.
And so with something like carrots, it's not producing a fruit, but it's critical to seed production and reproduction for that plant.
That's right. If you want to, you grow a tomato, you have a flower, you pollinate the flower, you get a tomato, right? In the case of carrots, it all happens in advance. You've got to pollinate to get a seed. Now you've got your seed, you put that in the ground, and then that grows into a carrot. And so you just need the pollination much further in advance.
So obviously pollination is key to so many different foods. And I don't think that has necessarily changed over the last 100 or so years.
Yep.
But my guess is pollinator conservation efforts has. Can you talk about what type of efforts are currently going on or how that landscape has changed over time?
What's happened over the last 100 years is, farmers have become more and more specialized. And what they've tended to grow just one or two or three things on a much bigger scale. In the old days, when we had much smaller scale, so, apple orchards that were, 10 or 20 acres, you would have a lot of habitat around that. You'd have a lot of diversity in the landscape. And if we want to support our pollinators, we need to have a wide variety of flowers that are blooming at different times of the year, and recognize those flowers could be from the crop, but they also are going to be in nature and the surrounding habitat. You need places for those bees to nest. A lot of them nest underground. Some of them nest under leaves and grass litter on the ground. Some of them nest up in trees. So you need to have these variety of different habitats for them to nest in. And when agriculture was small and really diverse and varied, you had all these things all the time, all over the place. Now today, you could have an apple orchard in Washington State that's 300 acres, or an almond orchard in California that's 1,200 acres. And so you've lost that diversity of resources, which means you've lost that variety and that abundance of, especially bees. Those are our most important pollinators. You've lost that variety and abundance of bees in the landscape around those fields. What that's meant for my work as somebody who works on the conservation of pollinators in these farm landscapes is we work with farmers to do a lot of different things, like to bring habitat back into that farm so you can support a whole variety of bees and hopefully a higher abundance of bees in the area around a field.
Let's say you take that really large apple orchard in Washington State. Why can't the bees just pollinate those apple trees and be happy with just that single flower if there's many of those single flowers? Why do you need diversity?
Oh, that's a great question. So when those single flowers are blooming, oh, let me tell you, if you've got a beekeeper who's got their honeybees there, if you are a wild native bee, and there are hundreds of different kinds of wild native bee, they are ecstatic. They're like, sweet, for like 2.5 weeks, it is a smorgasbord. Like they have an abundance of food, right? They are just eating, nectar, pollen, they're getting it all. And then it's gone. And so great, for 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, you've got this huge amount of bloom, all these flowers with all this pollen and nectar. And then what are they going to eat beforehand? And then what are they going to eat later? And most of these bees need, like some bee species, certain species are only around for maybe 8 weeks. So they still, even if you've got that 2-3 weeks of bloom, you still need something before and after. Other bee species like bumblebees are around all year long. So they need a lot early in the spring, all the way through the end of the summer. And if you're a honey beekeeper and you've got a hive of honeybees, again, they're active all the time. And so you need to make sure there's food for them throughout the whole year. So you're right. Like on the one hand, that's a lot of food, but it's only there for a short period of time.
Okay. And how strategic do you need to be when thinking about those plants in different seasons? Is it something where you're being very strategic, like this plant will be available at this time and this plant will be available at this later time? Or is it more like, oh, if we do a variety of plants, we'll kind of know it works out?
For certain farmers, they may just recognize, okay, look, I've got my apples that are in bloom. I'm going to try to have some stuff in the springtime, and I'm going to try to have a lot blooming all through the rest of the year. And just, think about it some, but not stress about it too much. Others, though, and where I get kind of frankly interested, I've got cranberry growers, for example, that I've worked with in Massachusetts. And with those cranberry growers, we recognize, like, okay, we've got a cranberry bloom from middle of June to the end of July. Bumblebees are super important cranberry pollinators, and we know the flower species that bumblebees really like. So we designed habitat plantings around cranberry bogs that had a lot of early season wildflowers that we knew the bumblebees loved. And then, tried to not have anything blooming when the cranberry was blooming. And then okay, what are all those great things that we want to have for afterwards? The mountain mint and the wild bergamot and the goldenrod and the aster and these sorts of things, milkweed, all these things that bumblebees love for later.
That's really interesting. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was fun. It's fun stuff. And actually, I'll add one more thing. We work with a lot of scientists all across the country. And so part of what we try to understand is, what are the most important wild bees, native bees, for example, for a particular crop? When are they active? And then how can we really fine tune our support for those?
So you mentioned scientists. Can you talk about how do you actually measure, collect data? When I think of pollinators, I mean, they're very tiny, they're moving around all the time. How do you actually measure what these pollinators are doing?
Oh my goodness. It's actually a pretty fun question. And there are a lot of different ways. The research partners we've worked with have tried to understand, for example, how much pollen does a bee deposit on an almond flower? They really were struggling to get almond flowers and get the bee on it. They literally were cutting off branches with almond flowers and then trying to move them around to get the bee to land on their flower. Then they would know which flower, they could take it, see how much pollen got deposited, know what bee it was. So it can get kind of fun like that. The technique that was used a lot with squash and pumpkins and watermelon. Put a bag over flower, take it off, so no bee has visited it. Wait for a bee, identify that bee, and then close it up. And again, you can see, okay, that was a squash bee, and that we collected, we did this 300 times, kind of tedious. And on average, those squash bees deposited 25 pollen grains. And so you can get a measure of what was the bee that was doing the visitation and how much pollen were they depositing.
It sounds like it's mainly you need patience, not necessarily a high-tech situation, but you just need patience.
A lot. Well, like so much of science, I like to think science is cool, right? You're discovering things, you're exploring new ideas, but so much of it is just coming up with a very good plan and taking your time and needing a lot of patience.
I feel like honeybees get the most attention when it comes to pollinators.
Sure.
Why, and what is the current landscape like in terms of how much are honeybees pollinating certain plants versus other native species?
So honeybees are important because let's say you're growing 1,200 acres of almonds or 400 acres or 800 acres of apples. It's hard to have enough habitat in that landscape to supply all the wild bees to provide that service. And so when these farms have gotten that big, we need to bring in pollinators, and honeybees are they're our workhorse, right? They're the species, we know how to manage them. We know how to move them around. We know how to bring them into an ag field. And so they're super important. The work that Xerces does and the work that my team oversees, we focus on the native species. Like honeybees were introduced from Europe. They're not a native species. They're important, like I said, but they're not part of the native wildlife and biodiversity. But one thing I really like is in agriculture landscapes, in these farm landscapes, when we create really nice habitat for a whole suite of pollinators, ideally we're helping honeybees too. And so I feel like these hopefully go hand in hand, where when we're putting in some sort of a wildflower strip or a hedgerow that's full of flowering shrubs and trees and wildflowers, we're really supporting all of these insects.
One of the studies about the native bee pollination of cherry tomatoes, like it said something about bee visitation resulting in larger tomatoes. And I was just wondering, is that something that you see like across the board for different fruits? And is there a reason for why that might be?
Yeah, there is. A lot of us can probably think about how if we cut open a tomato, it's full of seeds, right? Or you cut open, a seeded watermelon and it's full of seeds, or a cucumber. You cut that cucumber open and it's full of seeds. For every seed in there, you needed a grain of pollen to go to the flower, right? And so if 100 grains of pollen go to, say, a cucumber flower, well, you get a cucumber that's like, that's that big. There we go. But if like 1,000 grains of pollen go to that flower, like all of a sudden your cucumber is going to be, I'm not going to say 10 times bigger, but a lot bigger. Because the plant is going to invest more energy in the fruit to feed those seeds and to give it that space. So we see that with tomatoes, things like cucumber and squash. There are a lot of these plants where the number of pollen grains that get deposited on the flower are one of the things that help lead to larger fruit. There are other things too, like how much water they get, how many nutrients they get, but pollen is another one. Strawberries are another good example. If we get a lot of pollen moved to a strawberry flower, you get bigger, more even, more delicious strawberries. Raspberries, same thing with raspberries. A lot of these fruits, the more pollination, the bigger.
When I think of different types of honey in the store, I think of oftentimes you'll see wildflower or clover, or maybe it's a more generic label, but I don't think I've ever seen one where it's like tomato, like these bees pollinated tomatoes.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why? Is it just like marketing purposes?
Oh, no, there are definitely reasons why. So if you take tomatoes, for example, honeybees actually don't even go to tomatoes. Tomato flowers do not produce nectar. So honeybees take nectar from flowers. That's the sweet sugar syrup in a flower, and they turn that into honey. Well, tomatoes don't produce it, and the pollen is buried up in these pores, like these little tubes, and to get the pollen out, you have to vibrate the flower. And so bumblebees are really good at this, and the pollen shoots out, and then the bumblebees gather that pollen up, etc. And so honeybees don't even visit tomatoes. So that's why, for example, we don't have tomato honey, but they do visit apple. And a lot of those early tree fruit, apple, cherries, they bring in nectar from those plants, and they actually do produce honey from like apple honey, but you don't often see apple honey. If you're in apple country, like in upstate New York or Pennsylvania, you might, but to get that, you've got to have a beehive where as soon as the apple bloom is done, you go and take the honey out, which is like in, May or June, like it's super early. And most beekeepers are like, I'm not harvesting honey now. I'm going to wait till the end of the year. And so for a lot of these crops where the bloom happens very early in the season, it's just not worth the time and the effort to try to pull out the honey that is, you know, unique to that that particular crop. So that's why you don't usually see, say, apple honey, for example. I've seen it on a farmer's market, like, you know, in upstate New York. But that's the, you know, that's the only place. So those are the two main reasons why. Some crops don't produce, like, you know, squash doesn't produce very much nectar. You don't really get a big, you know, nectar flush from pumpkins and watermelon and cucumbers and stuff. But you get a lot of pollen. And so it's important for some of those plants produce, you know, other important resources like pollen, but just not the nectar.
Currently, with the research and work you're doing, what do you think is piquing your curiosity? What are you excited about maybe for thinking in the future of what you might do?
I really am increasingly excited about this idea of designing habitat around specific crops. So the bees that are associated with specific crops, and continuing to sort of fine tune that. Because I mean, it's an interesting problem. But B, it's how do we create habitat that's going to have the greatest, you know, benefit for crop production? I think it's important to realize that there's so many other reasons to create habitat, right? There's pollination, there are other beneficial insects like little lady beetles and wasps and syrphid flies and lacewings, all these cool insects that also live in that habitat, and then go into the field and do things like eat aphids and eat little caterpillars that are eating the crop. You know, there are those benefits. And so when we work with farmers, we're really looking at this whole suite. We're creating pollination habitat, pest management habitat, food for wildlife and the songbirds. Like, we've got to tie all these things together. But if we can also do the best we can to maximize the benefit of that habitat for pollination, I think that'd be cool.
So can you just talk a little bit about maybe how you got to where you are today? Like, what's your story?
So I was the kind of person, when I was in high school, when I was in college, you know, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. But as I sort of thought about it, I realized I had 3 or 4 things that really were of interest or important to me. So I really like teaching. I love talking about things that excite me. I love insects. Like, I started keeping bees after I graduated from university. My best friend and I started keeping honeybees. And I was like, well, I mean, it was fun. It was pretty cool. But really what it did is it got me looking at the flowers. I was like, well, where are they going to get all this nectar for all their honey? And so I started watching them at the flowers. And that's when I noticed all the other insects on flowers, all the other bees and wasps and flies and beetles. And oh my goodness, like all sorts. So I was hooked. So I became totally excited about insects and found them fascinating, because every insect has its own story, its own unique, has its own story. And then the last thing is, you know, I really care a lot about the environment and nature. I grew up hiking, I grew up backpacking. And so for me, conservation of wildlife and habitat and the diversity of life that's out there was super important to me. And so as time went on, you know, I did a master's degree in entomology. I actually studied honeybees, but used that as a time to learn about all these other insects. I looked for opportunities to study insects in nature. So anyway, eventually 21 years ago, I got a job at Xerces, and there were 6 of us, and only 1 person worked full time. And then this year, we're probably going to hire our 75th staff person. We'll have 75 people on staff. So it's pretty exciting.
That's a really cool and inspiring story, both for yourself and for the organization.
Pretty fun. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it and are really excited to share this with students.
Awesome. Well, I'm super happy to do it. And yeah, I hope you all find it interesting and exciting. And I don't know, you all have questions that come up that are just burning, you need to know the answer to. First, try to figure it out for yourself. That's important. But second, yeah, let me know and I'll see what I can do.